Welcome. This is Bystanders, protecting children from boundary violations and sexual abuse. Perhaps you've participated in Darkness to Light's Stewards of Children and you want more. Or maybe this is your first experience with our trainings. As parents, caregivers, and professionals serving youth, protecting children is a top priority. This training teaches us how to be active bystanders in child sexual abuse prevention and response. A bystander is a person who is not directly involved in an interaction, but who senses that something is unsafe. To be a bystander, we don't have to have evidence that someone is unsafe. A gut feeling is enough to get involved. A bystander is also someone who witnesses a boundary violation or sees a situation in which another person is vulnerable.
And a young woman said she saw a kind of alpha male, the tough guy in the school, calling another girl a hoe and a bitch and a lot of names that were words she didn't like and very derogatory in her mind, even though they were common in the school. So she spoke up and said, "I don't like it when you call her that." Now, what's the likelihood that that young man is going to say, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, I will stop that right now"? Very unlikely. Chances are he's going to turn around and call her that and more, and he did. And he said, "And it's none of your business." To which she said, "You made it my business when you called her that in front of my face." And I had, as I so often have had, an aha moment from a young person. I went, "That's perfect. You made it my business when."
Being an engaged bystander means that harm to another person, especially to a child, is our business. It's a decision to be an advocate, a caring human being, and a member of a community. In the case of protecting a child from sexual abuse, it's saying, I'm the adult who will claim responsibility in this situation for this child's well-being. Put simply, it's a decision to act when we see or suspect harm to a child.
Courage is also a part of this change in our reactions. It takes courage to intervene. It takes courage to stand firmly and endorse boundaries. And it takes courage to do the right thing and choose the child.
It's important that we do intervene. It is our responsibility as a community, as adults, to make sure that we're protecting the children and keeping them safe.
When a child is being sexually abused or groomed for abuse, the child and the person offending are the two least likely people to intervene in their own situation. And yet in the past, our prevention efforts have been aimed at these two people. We've asked children to be aware of and avoid dangerous interactions with people, which so often they're unable to do. And we've increased the legal penalty for those who offend, but this happens only after a child has been harmed. Really, prevention must start with us, the responsible, bystanding adults around those two people.
The statistics are that most children know the person who abuses them. So if you know the child well, you probably know the abuser as well. And so you are the person who's most likely able to see what's going on, have an inkling of what's going on, and be able to intervene.
With child sexual abuse, we see boundary violations and red flag behavior much more often than we see direct sexual contact. So first we must notice the unsafe behaviors of people who offend, and we have to trust our feeling that something doesn't seem right. The first step to being an effective bystander is noticing what we see and trusting what we feel.
I think some of the behaviors that fell into the gray area, or the risky behaviors, were things like, he was really touchy-feely. He would always put his arm around me if I was sitting next to him, or put his arm behind me or something like that. I remember one time my grandfather was in town and he told me, he said, I was really upset. And I said, why? He said, because you ran and sat with Mr. Bob instead of me, and he put his arm around you, and I just thought it was weird. A man who's not in your family kissing you goodnight, it's kind of weird, but you care about him and you love him, and he says he loves you, so I guess it's okay.
It could be the uncle, it could be the the priest, it could be the police officer. These are individuals that gain the parent's trust first. They groom the parent. Once they groom the parent trusts them with their child. And now the grooming process starts on the child also.
Through the grooming process, you're facing escalating abuse, escalating violence, and it's being alternated with rewards. Your uncle comes over, you sit on, he asks you to sit on his lap, you sit on his lap, he gives you love, and that feels really good, and then the next day he comes over, you sit on his lap, he gives you love, and that feels really good, but then he puts his hand on your leg, right? And then you go out for ice cream. The next day he comes over, you sit on his lap, he puts his hand a little bit further up your leg, you go out for ice cream after. You're getting the positive reinforcement, you're getting the love from him, the attention that you want, you're getting an ice cream. And then as it goes on and he tests his boundaries and he sees, okay, she's not going to tell on me, she's not going to resist this, or, might feel uncomfortable, but she's not running away from this because you're blurring the boundary.
The parent should know that they are being groomed. Are they spending time with me so they can spend time with my child? The individual who calls up for the date, takes you on a date, and says, the next date, let's take your little baby, let's take little Johnny or little Mary to the zoo, right? So they start using that parent to get to the child.
He's setting you up to think that you owe him, because he would be our babysitter a lot of times, and he was great at that. And he would be in our home while we were away doing things, and he would fix dinner for them and just do a lot of fun stuff. We could almost call him kind of late, and he'd be happy to come and do all these things. And I think that it was like, you owe me, so you need to let me do whatever I want to do now.
One of the big things was with Mr. Bob, the only rule that there was is that there were no rules.
I think one of the ways that he eased us into the abuse was, like, what kid doesn't want to run around naked? You're not supposed to do it, so let's do it.
He had this big stack of speeding tickets, and at Christmas, in class, he would take up a collection from everybody who had gotten a speeding ticket taken care of to buy the lady at the court a Christmas present. Letting you and everybody else know he was able to do things, special rules applied.
Things like someone who is really intensely child-focused, somebody who spends all of their time with children or seems to, latch on to one particular child. That would be a behavior that would be concerning.
They're getting that child to stay after school and get one-on-one work with their homework.
People taking children home, we have that happen sometimes, taking them home on the weekends, or, I'm going to babysit for the parent, they're late, I'm going to take them home. So that's a red flag.
When you have an adult texting or emailing a younger person, that ought to raise at least some curiosity. And I'm talking about not in the course of a teacher providing some coursework information, but I'm talking about texting and the content is personal.
Children do come up and hug, because children like to hug, and so that happens. But I think if it's more initiated by the adult a lot of times, like, give me a hug, versus a child doing it on their own, that's a red flag sometimes, if it's consistent.
I would be concerned about an adult taking pictures of an individual child, period. There would really be no reason for an adult to be taking personal photos of an individual child. Yes, the group shot of the basketball team, that makes total sense, but taking a picture of one child, I would think that would be concerning.
We notice these behaviors and we trust the gut feelings we have. The next step is feeling responsible to get involved. Sometimes this means recognizing our fears or the excuses we make to avoid doing something. If we can spot these fears, we can make a choice to get past them.
Generally, in our culture, adults' rights trump children. So we believe the adults over the children, and we tend to think more about the impact on the adult than on the child. We think about the disruption to this person who harmed the child's life, career, and reputation more than the trauma to the child.
Fear of losing their job. Fear of, am I going to get too involved? Is something going to happen to me? Is something going to happen to my family because I blew the whistle?
And we also get really confused. This could be a really wonderful father or stepfather or mother or brother or sister. But if they are sexually abusing, they need to stop doing that. And we have a hard time holding on to those two truths.
And I think that's where most of us are really challenged, because it's really hard to set boundaries with other adults. It's a lot easier for us to set boundaries with children. And so we tend to like to talk to our kids about things, what's okay, what's not okay, what people shouldn't do to them, but we don't want to take it to the step of actually talking with the adult whose behavior is concerning.
Culturally, many of us believe we shouldn't get involved in other people's business, or that's not my child, so I shouldn't say anything. Part of the risk we've got to be willing to take is to speak up and to intervene at times when it might be uncomfortable, when we may not know what the outcome is going to be. And so that's part of the decision, a conscious decision, to be willing to take risk.
To stand up on behalf of a child, we have to take some risks. As strong bystanders, our values and our compassion carry more weight than our fears. And so we get involved.
In this work, people say trust your gut. And I think that's actually a great guideline in general, because I think it's like there's certain situations that make you uncomfortable, and we often don't know why we're uncomfortable, but that's the thing to sort of be watching for.
There are two kinds of interventions that a bystander can make. One is a spontaneous, on-the-spot intervention, and the other is a planned intervention. In a spontaneous intervention, we see something or have a gut feeling, and we act to protect the child right there in the moment.
I think an example where a coworker could call another coworker on behavior would be things like inappropriate language. You know, if you overhear another coach, swearing in front of children, that'd be a great place for, another adult to say, hey, keep it PG, or we don't use that kind of language around here.
Another person told me that whenever they would go to family parties, that her husband would take pictures, and he was like the family photographer. But when they got the pictures back, there always tend to be more pictures of the girls and the young girls in the family than of anybody else, and that always made her uncomfortable, but didn't think anything of it. So those are the kinds of things that I would say to be careful of. And when you see those, don't be afraid to talk about them.
A child has skunned their knee and needs a Band-Aid, and so one adult takes the child into the first aid room and gets a Band-Aid. That's outside the policy because it's the one-on-one, but it seems pretty innocuous. That'd be the kind of thing I think a coworker could call another coworker on, or a parent could call a coach on.
It could be simply that that someone loves tickling little kids, but they do it to the point where the kid's not necessarily enjoying it. Do I think that's suspecting child sexual abuse? No, but this is someone who doesn't necessarily understand boundaries and how it's important for children to set boundaries. So I would say that's something which is important to intervene for a couple of reasons. One is to tell that relative that this is something which is clearly making your child uncomfortable. So it models for your child how to have that conversation. So I would say it's great to do that right at the moment, right in front of your child. Say, well, I didn't mean anything about it. Of course you didn't mean anything about it. And that's why I'm saying something to you, because I care about you and I care about my daughter. It also sets a very clear message that this is a family with boundaries. And so if, in a worst case scenario, that person is someone who is planning on sexually abusing a child in your home, you've made it very clear that this is not a safe home to do that in.
What we really advocate is describe the behavior, set a limit, and move on. And ideally, a lot of situations can be that simple. Hey, our policy is no closed doors. I saw you yesterday with Sally and the door was closed. Remember, you can't close the door when you're with the kids. Start there.
For spontaneous interventions, describe the behavior to the person who is crossing the boundary, set a limit, or offer a more appropriate solution for that person, and move on. Moving on means that we refrain from making a scene or becoming highly emotional. It also means move to the solution. Make sure that the person who has violated the boundary is willing to follow the limit you've set. If not, remove the child to a safer situation.
It doesn't mean the person has any intention whatsoever of doing something wrong. But you're still saying, here's the boundary, you're crossing the boundary, please stop.
In a planned intervention, our actions may take place over a period of time and should include conversations with the person. We describe the problematic behavior and reinforce the child's boundaries.
I care about you, that's why I want to raise this, but I'm concerned about the fact that whenever we're at a wedding, that you always comment about how hot the 13-year-old girls are. Well, that makes me uncomfortable, and it also makes me wonder why you're looking at the 13-year-old girls, and is there something that we should be talking about? If you can talk about it from the perspective, I'm saying something because I care about you, and to say these are the behaviors that I'm concerned with, that's actually the best way of actually beginning a conversation.
When a parent has any kind of concern about, say, a neighbor wanting to spend time alone with their child, that it's appropriate to say something to that neighbor that can be both positive and limit setting. And so the positive would be, Johnny really enjoys spending time with you, and I appreciate your interest in him. And I've just taken this course about what I need to do to protect my child from spending a lot of time alone with somebody. And so I guess I've just gotten really cautious. And so I'm going to restrict some of Johnny's time with you. But one of the outcomes of that is you are saying to this person, I'm informed, I'm knowledgeable, I'm aware, and I'm vigilant. And in this business, we call that hardening the target, because then the neighbor may say, oh, this person is alert, and it probably isn't wise for me to pursue this child.
Sometimes bystander intervention is a process that involves several people.
The kids were at a community pool with her, kind of a grandparent, and she decided that it would probably be a good idea to put the kids in the shower together and wash them down after being in the chlorinated pool and that type of thing, and to jump in with them at that same point. We just felt that it was completely inappropriate, for a 60-year-old woman to be bathing with a 6 and 8-year-old child in the shower. I mean, we're their parents and we don't do that. So we just felt that it was just a really bad choice on her part. So my daughter was the one who actually told us all of everything that had gone on, and we asked her, did Grandma touch you in any place? Did she try to make you touch her in any place or anything like that? And she said no, that none of that happened. But, still the situation or the vulnerability of her being in that situation was just completely unacceptable to us. So we had that conversation with both of the kids that was a very inappropriate choice on her part, and that, that should never ever happen again. And if it does, you have that right to say, well, I'll wait until you're finished and then I'll go next, or I'd rather do this in private. It was a very awkward and uncomfortable time, but it was something that had to be done for our children, to let her know how inappropriate it was. There was a lot of trying to sweep it under the carpet at first, which did not sit well with me. And we had discussed it, and she said, well, I'll take care of it, because I know that, you're not going to be as diplomatic as I will with this, and this is my father's wife, so it really should be on me. So, it was several meetings. It was several sit-downs. Unfortunately, it wasn't a one-time, thing. Meetings at restaurants to discuss this, meeting at the house to discuss it. And then limitations were set down. Would we allow them to watch our children any longer? Would we need to be present if that be the case? And we kind of used all of those steps to put back into place that, okay, I'll bring the kids back around, but I'll stay with them and visit with you. We made her gain our trust back. Kind of met my peace with it, and we're moving forward, and I think that's very important too. Would I allow my children to be around her again? Unfortunately not. If they are going to be around her, it will be either in the company of either my wife or myself.
Take a moment to write it down, to write down what you heard, and keep a journal of all this, because in your worst, if this is actually a problem, that what I found is that often we can forget what happened last week. Write every incident that you're concerned about down, so that if again you need to either have a second conversation or you need to make a report, you have that information right there. If the person that you want to talk to has a tendency towards violence, absolutely don't do this alone. And if they have a tendency towards violence, you may not want to have that conversation at all. So it's okay to say, this is not someone I can talk to about it, and I have enough concern here that I'm going to say this person can't be either in my home, or you may want to say, I'm not going to leave this person alone ever with my child. And that's something that you not only you decide for yourself, but you tell your partner, you tell anybody else in the family. As long as my sister is dating this guy and is part of our family, I want to make sure that my children are never alone with that person. And if you really have a deep concern, you should report it. Sometimes the conversation is not what you need to have. If you really are, if you really suspect that somebody has sexually abused a child, make that report. Do nothing should not be an option. If you say nothing, it models the behavior for your child that the silence is what you are allowing in that house, and that it creates a void that your child is going to make. It's going to be more difficult for your child to actually say something.
When we intervene on behalf of children, we not only change the course of the immediate problem, but we change social norms. We model courage for other bystanders. We reinforce to children that we'll protect them, and we set firm standards for the person who's crossing boundaries. Our courage has that far-reaching of an effect.
It feels great. It really just feels absolutely wonderful, and there's nothing else to me in the world that could make up for that feeling.
Thank you for being a strong bystander, standing up for children, and ending child sexual abuse.